Hi folks, welcome back to Dungeons and Dry Brushing. If you've watched some of my previous videos, you may have heard me mention that I have a box full of crafting goods, just excess stuff. I think a lot of people have one of these. You know, offcuts, leftovers from old projects, interesting shaped things that should have gone in the recycling, that kind of thing. Well, that was a bit of an exaggeration. I don't have a box of just leftover stuff. I have two boxes of leftover stuff. So, rather than, give into my goblin-like urge to just hoard all the useful shiny things forever, I'm going to actually take some time in the next couple of videos, or in videos spaced out over the next month or two, to make use of some of this stuff, to dig through these boxes. I don't know what I'm going to make. I don't know how I'm going to make it. I'm just going to dig some things out of the box until something inspires me, and we'll make something useful for our games. Let's get started. As you can see, I keep all kinds of different things, some of them because they're unique or a fun shape, and others because of the material. I have cardboard rolls and corners that would make for great structural elements, jar lids, boxes, 3D prints that didn't work out but still might prove useful someday. When I'm looking at whether or not I want to save something, it's actually a similar process to what I find myself doing while digging through the bits box, what in my own head I call thinking in miniature. I kind of think of the comparative size and shape of the object and spend just a few moments trying to figure out what it could be at the proper scale. If I can immediately start coming up with ideas, I know that's something I want to save. But if nothing comes to mind or inspires me, I just take it as a sign to throw it away. If I didn't, then I would be sorting through 8 or 10 bits boxes, not just 1 or 2. So that's about half of it. Look, don't you judge me. You're watching this. You're an enabler. You're part of the problem. This might be a bigger series of videos than I thought. Once everything is out on the table, or half of everything in this case, it's time for the fun part. I just kind of play, see how things fit together, look at them, see what else they might be in that smaller scale, turn them on their side, roll them across the table, wrap one thing up in another thing, and then stack them on a third thing and see what they look like. Just enjoy the process of actively working with your own imagination and seeing what you come up with. To do this, I make sure to take away any items that aren't speaking to me today and put them back in the box. Almost all of this stuff is useful, but it's not all going to be useful today. So, after sorting through things, taking away everything that just doesn't speak to me today, that I don't get any immediate ideas for, I'm looking at about 6 projects. Sadly enough, I still don't think that's going to get me down to just one box of leftover craft materials, but, one project at a time. Or at least one handful of projects at a time. Okay, so after playing around a little bit more, I've settled on a project for today. The rest of it goes back in the boxes. I'll dig it out again in a week or two, and we'll see if the same things still speak to me. But for now, I've got the day's project. Now, in my homebrew setting for my next campaign, things are inspired by ancient Rome and Greece, with a fantasy twist, of course. But I don't have a lot of buildings for that setting. I'm working on that. I've got a few put away, but I can always use more, and one thing that I am looking for is a grain mill. So, I think I'm going to make one out of some of the objects that I found in the boxes. With my project selected, it's time to start putting together the basic structure. I'm going to take the shape of our grain silo, not a grain mill, by the way, that's a different thing, I misspoke earlier, it's a silo. I'm going to make it out of an old plant pot and the lid of a peanut butter jar. Those just go together with hot glue. I want some exposed wooden beams on the outside of the silo, so I take some offcuts of XPS foam and use my hot wire cutter to mill them down to a roughly round shape. Then I use the wire brush to lightly brush across the surface for wood texture. I use the same technique on thin cut strips of foam to get the wooden boards I'm going to use to cover up the texture of the jar lid. Once they're textured, I just hot glue the pieces on, wrapping them around the lid. Anywhere that they don't quite cover, since they were made using offcuts and they weren't measured to purpose, I just cut another smaller piece to fit in, and I use a toothpick to add some holes to the ends of the boards as if they're nailed into place. Now it's time to take the exposed support beams and cut them into small pieces. On the ends of the beams I use a pen to draw in the kind of circular ring details that you might find on the inside of a tree. Everything has to have some texture. Nothing stays just flat. Then the finished supports get glued in place around the roof on the silo, and like any good crafter, I pretty much just eyeball it. In the spirit of reusing old materials, when it came time to build the front door and roof hatch, I actually just cannibalized an old experiment from years ago and repurposed the foam. It had been sitting in my project space for ages, it was already textured, and it was no longer something I needed, so why not reuse it? For both door handles, I used tacky glue to attach a simple jewelry ring. Then it's time to texture the roof. For that, I use one of my favorite new tricks, Galleria Sand Texture Gel. I use a small palette knife and spread it across the entire surface of the roof. It's going to dry clear and leave an amazing rough texture behind. So using this material and technique is something that I picked up from Leif at Devs and Dice. He makes great videos. If you like what I do, you're going to love what he does. Go check out his channel. I decided that a ground floor access to a grain silo didn't make much sense to me, so I was going to need some stairs. It's at this point that I decided I really wanted this to be a playable building. I want miniatures to be able to fit on the stairs and to be able to fight up and down them or use them as a height advantage with ranged weapons. So rather than go for a more realistic look that's in the correct scale, I went back to the same technique I used to make the exposed supports to make some big chunky stairs that are more functional in game terms. I map out roughly where to put them, and then they get hot glued on as well. While I'm doing that, I keep a miniature on hand to make sure everything works as I need it to. And finally, I add a door using the exact same method that I used on the roof hatch. So the basics of our structure are done, but when it comes to making buildings look realistic and lived in, there's sort of a golden rule. Granularity. If you think you have enough detail, add more. Add more. Add more. So our construction is fully complete. I'm going to let the glue dry overnight because the white glue takes a long time, and you want to make sure it's fully dry before you paint over anything. I'll see you tomorrow. I primed the building in a dark brown foam safe primer from Army Painter. If you don't have that, there's absolutely no reason that Mod Podge and black paint wouldn't work the same way. To paint the surface of the building, I've gotten out 4 paints: a khaki, yellow ochre, a light pink, and bright yellow. I'm just going to take a large brush, keep it wet, and stipple and brush the paint on randomly and roughly, adding more of each color as I feel like it. This is a really rough kind of wet blending that will still help to give us an interesting color for our base tone. If you try this and it looks too drastic to you, don't worry, we're going to bring it back together later with dry brushing and washes. Once that rough base coat is done, it's time to start picking out details. Raw sienna for the roof, and burnt umber for the exposed wood, doors, and steps. I'm also going to add some weathered and faded decorations to the building itself. I do start this process with masking tape, but I make the mistake of trying to eyeball this part too, and it ends up crooked anyway. Whoops. Luckily, by the time this is fully weathered, you can't really tell. Regardless, I start by painting this very vivid teal. Once the teal is on, I start the weather process by taking a sponge and painting on a lighter blue. When I'm done with that, I peel off the masking tape. Unfortunately, it did bring up a little bit of the base coat with it, but that's alright. We can touch those spots up. I take the original paint colors and dab them on to cover up the spots that were pulled away, but I also dab them on randomly in the middle of the decoration and around the edges to make it look like it's been worn away by time and the elements. And if you're wondering, well, why start off with the masking tape if you're just going to scuff up the lines anyway? The answer is that you probably don't have to, but I was winging it and it seemed like a good idea at the time. I chose orange for the old cloth on the rooftop to offset the teal, and I painted the rope in with an aged off-white, though you could use any color for any of this that you want to. And finally, everything on the building gets a dry brush in linen, a very light off-white color. Dry brushing everything with the same color will not only age and highlight everything, but it will also help to bring the entire piece together and make it look more cohesive. Once the dry brushing is done, I pick out the metallic details. On this building, that's just the door handle and the chains. With the metallics done, it's time to apply a wash. I've chosen to do a brown oil wash. If you'd rather use an acrylic wash, that would work just fine too. I mix brown oil paint with mineral spirits, keeping it pretty thin. I want this to dull the colors a little bit, but not wash them away completely. Then I just apply it to the entire grain silo, top to bottom, making sure everything gets coated. The oil wash is going to take about an hour to set. And after that, it's time to come back for the final step. That final step is to take a light pigment powder and apply it anywhere that I think dust might have collected on the building. The inside of the steps, the rooftop, and about the bottom third of the building to give everything a dusty, well lived in look. Okay guys, project's finished. This was a lot of fun actually, and I got a very usable, great building out of stuff that I just had lying around. I did make a lot of mistakes as I went along, but this is actually the perfect kind of build for making mistakes on. You're not ruining an expensive kit or a 3D print that took you ages and a ton of resin to do is kind of just made from garbage. So if you make a few mistakes, it's a great time to practice how to cover up your mistakes. Anyway, here's the big reveal, and I hope I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching. Please hit like, subscribe, and recommend this to any friends that you think might like it.